is maybe the internet's hardest working person. You might know her from her website, Design Sponge, which receives approximately 1 million page views every single day. She's been published internationally. She produces many, many, many resources for entrepreneurs, including a new podcast called After the Jump. Today, she's going to talk about fear, weakness, and confidence. You can talk to her about peach pie, her pit bull mix hope, and probably anything, because I think she knows everything. Ladies and gentlemen, Grace Bonney.
Hi, guys. Oh, please excuse me while I stand up on a milk crate. Don't I seem so much taller now? This is good. Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Margot and Stuart, for having me. I've been wanting to come to this festival for so long. I'm so happy to be here and super inspired to be around so many people who are into the same things that I love. But I have to admit, when I first got my email from Stuart and Margot about talking, I had this immediate sense of dread and a flashback to the worst moment of my life. It was 2010. I was standing on a stage in front of about 1,000 people in Portland, Oregon, and I had a giant styrofoam robot looming over me. Seriously, a giant styrofoam robot. So it was 2010, and I had been invited to speak at the international gathering of the Industrial Designers Society of America, and every single thing that could have gone wrong for that speech went wrong. I tripped on the way up the podium, I forgot my speech at the hotel, and then right as I was about to go on stage, the technician who was putting my mic on said, "Oh, do you need some time to change?" So apparently my outfit was so bad that even the mic guy thought I should change. So that's where my head went when I was thinking about that. But needless to say, a few hours later, I was back in my hotel room, away from people that I thought were giving me the death glare, and I realized I had survived one of my worst nightmares coming true. And it made me think about what it's like to survive something that's terrible, because 2 days later, I was back in Brooklyn, life went on as normal, and I got through it okay. So for today's talk, I really want to talk about the importance of embracing things that are terrifying, which is something I continue to do every day, because the scary things will continue to pop up. They will always be there. They don't go away. What changes is the behavior. And today I want to talk you through the process I've used to sort of undo a 30-year-old habit of running away from things that scare me. So I hope you'll bear with me. So I want to start in the beginning. 10 years ago, I started my blog, Design Sponge. This is, I think, pretty much, it's a really high-tech, fancy, custom layout. I think everybody had this layout. But I started my blog because I was miserable in my job. I had just left a job at a record label. I was primarily tasked with mailing CDs, organizing street teams, and tracking down flaxseed crackers for the bass player from Phish. I was incredibly unhappy, and most importantly, I was really uninspired. And I needed a place to talk about the things that did make me happy. So Design Sponge was born. But what began as a one-woman project essentially turned into a team publication that now speaks to a little over 1 million people a day. And that growth didn't happen overnight, but it did happen more quickly than I was ready for. And a lot of times I found myself struggling to keep up with the demands, so many of which I placed entirely on myself, to keep paying team members, to keep up with the cost of giving people a fair and livable wage, as well as giving them benefits, and then to keep up with the image that everything was doing fine at the site. But at the same time that all that stuff seemed great from the outside, I was having a really hard time inside. I was the only 25-year-old in my social circle that I knew who had gone to the ER with a stress-induced migraine, and I was 28 when an optometrist told me that I had the eyes of an 80-year-old and should probably spend less time in front of a computer. But on the outside, everybody thought everything was great. I wrote a really successful book. I tackled a 33-city book tour. Note, don't ever do a 33-city book tour. And I signed the lease on our very first office in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and it was a really exciting time. But on the inside, I didn't feel any happier than I did when I first started everything. So after 8 years, I was running on empty and didn't have the energy to take the risks that had helped set my business apart in the first place. I had become a machine, churning out the content that I thought people wanted from me and acting in a way people I thought wanted me to act. But as most of you know, working solely to articulate somebody else's vision and someone else's dreams while pursuing few of your own is a very, very sad way to live. Then in 2011, I watched another blogger, a rival blogger, get the chance to bring my dream project to life. My dream project is House of Style. How many of you remember House of Style? Todd Time. And a wonderful show, and it had been my secret burning interior desire to make that a reality and bring it back, but then somebody else got the job. And I basically realized that no one was gonna hand me my dream projects. Nobody knew what I was thinking of, nobody knew what I wanted, and that if I spent all my energy pursuing things that made other people happy and not me, I was never gonna get to a place that felt fulfilling. I really think some sad part of me actually thought someone would knock on my door and just hand me the things that I liked if I worked hard enough, but that doesn't happen. So at the end of 2011, I decided to take control of my life and my website again. And that meant that I had to face so many scary things and face the fact that I knew the things I didn't know yet. And I was terrified. So I took a moment to do the thing that's the scariest. I faced my fears and looked at them in the light of day. And before you can tackle any fear, you have to really break something down and understand why it's getting a negative response from you in the first place. So I made myself a little flow chart, and this is basically what I ask myself when I try to get to the things that scare me. The first thing I have to do is actually acknowledge the things I'm terrified of. And the most powerful thing you can do to push through any difficult situation is to actually admit the thing you're scared of. And that doesn't mean just say it to yourself. That means say it to another living human being and somebody who understands what you do. Because I find admitting things to your parents is not quite as helpful as admitting them to people who know what you do. But actually talking about things helps ease the size of something. It doesn't make it seem so big anymore. But it doesn't completely get rid of a fear, but stopping to actually say it out loud is part of the first step. For me, this became really real at the end of last year when the online ad market tanked and the cost of paying writers a good wage and benefits became a real challenge. I was scared of not having enough money to make payroll, and it wasn't until I sat down with a friend over coffee one day and said it out loud that it became a real situation to me. And that moment was scary, it was embarrassing, it was difficult to look at somebody else in the face and say, oh, I'm that girl who has a podcast about how to run a business, but at the same time, I'm having a really difficult time actually running my own business. But it was really good to say out loud, and I found that that mountain that seemed so terrible became a bit more of a steep hill. And while climbing a steep hill is never going to be my favorite thing to do, there's another step that helps make that hill seem a little bit less scary. I have to ask myself, what am I actually scared of? All those things you admit, not being able to pay bills, not being able to get the job you actually want, that's just the thing on top of what you're actually scared of. That's never the thing that's actually underneath everything else. You have to break down to that layer of what is the thing that that means to me. And for me, not being able to pay payroll or having to disappoint an employee or downsize, all those things are embarrassing, but it was really about feeling like a failure as a business person, and that was underneath everything. And getting to that level of realizing it wasn't just about payroll was incredibly powerful. Basically, I think that most work-related fears are never as life-threatening as they seem when you get to the bottom of what the bottom layer is. But the other thing you have to do is actually talk it out loud. What is the worst-case scenario and what could actually happen? Nobody wants to do this. This is the thing everybody runs away from. But if you take a second to think, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? Could I fall on my face? Could I lose my business? Will everybody hate me? If you talk those things through to the end, they're never what you think they're going to be. For me, that was a phone call to my dad. And he's been running his own business for 20 years, and I knew he would understand what it felt like to not be running the business you thought you were. And I said to him, I don't know what's happening. I can't make ends meet. I can't pay the people who I respect and work with. What am I going to do? And he said, well, let's figure out what that looks like. So I had to actually write down on a piece of paper what it looked like to close a business. And I wrote down all the processes that happened. And I ended up in a place of, okay, I have to close the business, and then I'll have to look for another job. And that split second of thinking for working for somebody else who could tell me what to do was all the motivation I needed to get back in there and fight to save my business. And that fight is how I'm still standing here today running a business where I can pay payroll. But I had to get to the place where I actually admitted out loud, this is what it would look like to have my worst nightmare come to life. Now, I knew that my choices were, which were difficult, less personal and emotional when I broke them down. And I find that it's incredibly difficult if you run your own company, whether it's a one-person studio or a 10-person business, to actually take the emotional part out of a difficult decision. But when you talk to somebody else and talk out that scary part, that's exactly what happens. You have a moment to see your decisions just as decisions. They're no longer things that reflect who you are as a person, reflect who you are as a business owner. They just become choices on a piece of paper, and it becomes a lot easier to look at them rationally and decide what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. Now, that's an easy thing to do if you talk to people, you figure things out, but underneath everything, I find there's still this little nagging fear that most of us have, and that's hearing the word no. How many of you still live with that fear of having somebody you respect just say no to you in the face? It's a good chunk of everybody, and I think we're all in very good company. I don't know a single person who isn't afraid to hear the word no, but what I do know are a few people who have gotten less afraid to hear the word no. I think the way to do that is to basically break down what you think no means to you. To me, hearing the word no means this. It means that I'm not good enough. And that might be different for all of you. Hearing the word no might mean something different, but for me, I struggle a lot with the idea of whether or not I'm good enough for someone, for something, or for some opportunity. But I also had to think about what does the word no to me mean in the bigger sense. And to me, I was worried about other people's perception of me, and what would they think? And I was worried they would think she's not the person we thought she was. She doesn't have it all together. And that was a terrifying thing to face. And the very last level of breaking down no to me was realizing I thought the single word no would mean you're done. There's no second chance. You can't pick out another outfit. You're just done. And when I talked that out and I realized how silly that sounded, that one person telling me no, I couldn't do something, or I couldn't have what I wanted, or I couldn't have it when I wanted, would mean the end of me, it seemed crazy. But I had to actually have all those moments of vulnerability to figure out what the word no really represented. So I embarked on something that a good friend of mine is a big fan of, and that is rejection therapy. How many of you have heard of rejection therapy? Get ready to find your new weekend habit. It's very exciting. So rejection therapy is essentially a practice that aims to take the negativity out of the word no. You essentially expose yourself over and over and over to situations where you have a high probability of hearing the word no. And what ends up happening is that you desensitize yourself to the word no. And ultimately, you find yourself exposed to examples where you find out that people will say yes more than you realize. Here's a good example. So my friend and coworker, Amy Azarito, introduced me to the idea of rejection therapy, and she was the first one to try it. So she walked into this local nail salon in Brooklyn and politely asked if she could have a Tuesday discount on a Wednesday. And there was never a Tuesday discount to begin with. She walked out with a manicure and a totally made-up discount that the store decided to honor because she simply asked. And there's some bigger implications there about what we expect from small businesses, but the lesson was, if you ask for things, you might just get what you actually want. And Amy's small example of that was something that really inspired me to start trying it in my own life. And while that example is a much smaller version of what a lot of us are facing when it comes to larger overarching fears, it's a good place to start. So maybe you don't want to start right at the top. You don't want to cold call someone that you've been dying to work with and ask them everything you want right up front. What you do need to find is the courage to ask somebody you respect for the help to get to that place. And that's what I want to talk about today, because facing your fears, it's not just about diving in head first without a plan. That's irresponsible, and no one should ever tell you to just quit your job, do all the things you love without thinking about them. You have to make a plan. So armed with my rejection preparation, I made myself push further into that awkward discomfort that comes from being nervous and afraid of something. And I took my very first step towards asking for something that I wanted. And basically, everything was fine after I asked. So I took one more step towards something scary, and to my delight, life continued to go on like normal. Each step got easier over time, and I realized that if I focused on the small steps rather than the huge end goal, that I could push past small moments of fear and apprehension and get closer to the things I really wanted. So here's the process I try to keep in mind. A to B is never a huge leap. A to B is actually A step 1, A step 2, A step 3, A step 4. If you don't stop to acknowledge the small steps that come in between the beginning and the end of a huge goal, you will never get to the end place. While anyone who's a fan of David Allen, who is the guru behind getting things done, probably already knows, statistically, people are much more successful in reaching goals when they can break them down into smaller, bite-sized, actionable items that you can actually accomplish in the course of a day, a week, or a month. And that's an idea that bears repeating over and over again. So many times I see incredibly talented people with great ideas completely fail because they just jumped right into the deep end. And if you don't stop and take baby steps into it, you're never going to reach it. So part of that preparation is getting in touch with what you really want and what that represents for you, and being able to chart your progress and appreciate it along the way. So I'm a fan of a pretty hippy-dippy method of getting in touch with what you really want. I did used to work for Fish, after all. And it's called vision boarding. How many of you have heard of that? All right, ladies who read my site. Whenever I discuss this idea in New York, I see like a sea of white of people's eyes just rolling back in their head and laughing at how stupid this seems. But then the other week I was teaching a class on this same topic in San Francisco, and everybody raised their hand and was like, this is such a great idea. It's so great for getting in touch with your subconscious. So I'm hoping that because we're somewhere in the middle of the country, you'll bear with me on this idea. Vision boarding is basically a process where you turn off your brain and allow your body and whoever you are at your core to respond to things that make you happy. You sit down, I do this in front of the TV all the time, grab a stack of magazines, it doesn't matter what they are, and you just start cutting out things that make you happy. It could be a texture, it could be a word, it could be a photograph. You just start cutting and you don't ask questions. And when you've got a nice stack in front of you, it's your job to look at them and make sense of them. This sounds crazy, but I've done it for the last 2 years, and it's predicted everything that has been wonderful and exciting in my life. And I don't mean that in a psychic sort of way, but I mean that it's allowed me to get in touch with the goals that are actually important to me. So often we make risk about doing the things that we think we should be doing, or risk is about achieving something that we want other people to see us doing. But if you're taking a risk because you want somebody else to see you do it, or you want something to add to your resume, you're taking the wrong risk. You should be taking a risk because you want something so badly that you're willing to take however close you can get to that goal. And this is a really good, I'm gonna embarrass my wife who's in the front row and give an example that I think is a good example. She went to summer camp and ran to be sort of the head of her color day wars, and loved it so much, but unfortunately did not win, and had a good moment of shock and disbelief that she didn't win, but then realized that she still enjoyed being a huge part of that camp and that activity and loved it, and ended up being still an active member of that community. If you don't have that sense of, I'm still willing to be involved in something if I can't be the best, number one, the head of everything, then that's not a risk you should be taking. So that's something I want everybody to keep in mind when you're plotting that sort of risk. So I'm gonna totally embarrass myself and share my vision boards from the last 2 years. So this is mine that I made, and you can laugh, it's totally okay. In 2013, and I turned off my head and I just started cutting things out. And this was a big year of personal growth for me. I had come out publicly, I was moving into a new apartment, I was dealing with a really tough business time, and when I looked at all of this stuff and put it all together, I realized how important having a really balanced, happy, simple life was to me, and that was completely in opposition to the way I was living. I had been living where I have to do 15 projects at once, I have to do everything myself, and I have to have a lot of stuff, and that's what makes me happy. And then I sat back and I looked at this board and realized that's actually not what makes me happy. What makes me happy are all these simple things that I seem to want to put around myself, and why am I not surrounding myself with those things? So essentially, this is what it broke down to me. And I'm pretty sure that I just wanted that ice cream in the middle. So this is my 2014 board, and no one has seen this outside of my immediate home. But this is my board for this year, and they continue to get simpler and simpler and simpler. And for some of you, it may be the opposite of that. You might have a crazy-ass cluttered board that takes up an entire room. But whatever it is for you, you have to make this and get in touch with what you actually want to do. For me, I'm still figuring this out, but I realized that the more that I cut things out, I wanted to be outside more, and not just in my personal life. I wanted to make things that had to do with the outside world a bigger part of my business, so that's a huge goal of mine. I also picked out names that are going to be a part of a product line that I'm launching, and all of these things started to make sense when I looked at them in a much bigger point of view. So, let's talk about something that's important to acknowledge to get you through fear. If you don't own the skills and the talents and the experience that you have that you're bringing to the table, you're never going to be able to take the leap to do something you're scared of. I find people spend so much time worrying about the things that they want without actually sitting down to figure out why they do deserve to have them. My wife, Julia, who I mentioned before, is one of the bravest people that I know, and she had a wonderful opportunity outside of college to go jump on a plane and take part in a project that had very little actually outlined, and she didn't really know what she was doing, but she knew that it was something that was exciting and had a lot of opportunity attached to it. And at the end of the trip, the work that she was a part of resulted in an incredible television show and a cookbook, and all of the things she was scared of ended up falling away, because when she got there, she realized all those skills that she had, even though they were honed in New York, totally translated and made sense in other places across the world. And for every single one of you, the same thing applies. If you've had years of experience as an illustrator, or years of experience designing websites, whatever it is, those skills don't go away when you try something new. You bring them to the table. So you have to actually ask yourself, every time you're scared to do something, what am I actually bringing to the table? And how do those skills make me the right person for the job? And I mean actually write these things down. Open up a notebook, open up a new page in your computer, and write down all the things that apply to this skill or this opportunity that you want to have. Experience counts, even failures count, things that you've tried that you've learned from. Keep those in mind, because all those things are things that other people may not be bringing to the table. And if you don't take the time to really kind of pat yourself on the back a little bit, you're never going to have the confidence to actually charge forward towards the things that you want. So let's go back to my styrofoam monster for a minute. Basically, what I learned from my first big public speaking disaster was twofold. I learned that I needed more experience to ease my fear of simply speaking to that many people in person. I also learned that I needed to improve my way of speaking, organizing, and my interview skills to understand the best way to communicate with others in that format. Those skill and experience deficits could have made me walk away, forever a speech failure. But instead, I chose to face them head on in a way that felt realistic and practical. I wrote a cold email to a radio station in Brooklyn and asked if I could have a show. I thought, I'm a terrible interviewer. I'm not good at talking to people in person. I'm going to force myself to do this every single week until I get better. My goal was not to become the best radio host that ever lived. My goal was to get better at the things I knew were scary to me. And what happened is that it kind of worked out. The same fear and nervousness and anxiety that destroyed me at that talk still showed up to the show. I still had moments where they were nervous, but they faded away with every episode. And with each show, my confidence grew. My speaking voice improved, and I felt an ease and comfort with speaking to people that can only come with time and trial and error. Now what was once something that I could have listed as one of my major weaknesses is now one I count on as a strength. So rather than running from the chance to speak to people, I try to focus on the experience I do have and use that confidence in each new opportunity. What keeps me going to this day, despite new fears popping up on a daily basis, is a simple thought, that for me, the cost of taking a risk and doing something that scares me is far less than the cost of not taking one. When I talk to people who I work with in business consulting, one of the first things that always comes up is somebody really weighing on a piece of paper what the cost of a risk is, what they could lose, what embarrassment could happen, what people might say about them, but they never take the time to think about what it feels like to not do the thing you wish you had tried. And I find at the end of the day, that gnawing thought of what you didn't do or what you could have tried weighs so much more heavily on you than actually failing. because most of us fail on a daily basis. Things don't work out, and it's totally okay to move on from them. You will always learn something. But if you don't try, you never have the chance to learn anything different, not just about that opportunity, but what about you actually don't know yet. If you fail something, you might discover that there's a part of you didn't know before. You might learn you're great at something that you never had the chance to try. But if you don't try it, you never learn those things and you never grow. We all have a chance or a project in the back of our mind that we wish we would do. And I want you to think about what the steps are to get you there today and what you can talk about that will help you be less afraid of them. I want to end today by talking about Maya Lin, who's a native Ohioan and one of my favorite designers. And she said, "All of my work is much more peaceful than I am." And this is something I think about a lot. I think that when people look at the end project or the end result of somebody they really respect, they don't think about the hustle behind it. The picture I like to keep in my mind is the idea of a duck and treading furiously under the water, but you never see it. All those people who have dream projects and dream jobs, they're working just as hard as the rest of us. And I think it was Tom Clancy, the writer, who said there's no such thing as an overnight success. Every overnight success is 10 years in the making. And it's entirely true. And to get held up by something like that would be so sad, because there's so much potential, not just in this room, but in rooms like this everywhere, where there are people who have ideas and dreams that they want to try, but they're too scared to fail. But keep in mind that whether it's asking for a dream job at your favorite studio, opening your own shop, or writing your book for the first time, every big dream starts with a single step. And it's important to ignore that shakiness that comes with first steps, because there will be shakiness. But with every first step and every one you take after that, your footstep grows stronger and louder and so much firmer in your resolve towards your end goal. And I'm really honored to be sharing a path with so many of you and so many talented people who are taking that path, not being afraid to fall down, picking themselves back up, and trying something exciting. So I'm excited to be there with you, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you've all had a great first day at WMC. It's been an honor to speak with you guys. Thanks.